That. Keep it alive through these lines I write. I keep it live cause I thrive. I might just blow your mind tonight. I'm so hyped but it's no hype. From this height it's direct hits on sight. I'm your type, lend me your ears to show you that there's something in me. I'm not giving up, I'm standing right here holding these days hostage. And I'll make this my year. We turning fear into love and the love's in the air. I love doing this cause nothing compares. Nothing can share that same type of feeling when you feeling them flares. They can't catch it, it's havoc, I rip to a tear. Switch the scenario, my stereos, I leave them impaired. Variables start to change and they're all in my range. I just gotta grab it, it's all mathematics. Every step is drastic, I make it fantastic. I'm trying to take your breath away. Asthmatic.
This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo.
Yeah, just nod your head with it, so explicit and vivid. Every image is intricate, intimate. I put my all into it, no scrimmage and no rules. I'm a pro tool, hear my heartbeat, beat into the vocals. I'm so loco, lost my mind, oh no. It's ponderoso, dope, so no overdose, cause it's dope, yo. Man, this is house grown, mixed with some milestones. So I let the style flow down like the Dow Jones, bringing it with some foul tones, letting the crowd know we getting loud, so it's eardrum rudiments. Yeah, we bring it rude again. Move, little hooligan. Music for tuning in, full time to the 10. I'm on my clock like I told you. I'm doing this for dreams we pursuing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anti-Media Radio. Once again with your host Nick Bernabe here on UCY.tv. Thank you all for tuning in and welcome back to the show. It's been several days since we've had our last show, and there's been a lot going on. Hopefully you checked out the show last night, and then on Monday we had a special show for Memorial Day, and a lot of people seemed to enjoy it. We had a Navy veteran on, a good friend of mine, and he was on the show and talked a lot about what guys go through and everybody goes through in the military, and how people wind up in that situation, and what he personally went through, and reflecting back on it now and decisions that he would have made differently. We all know war is bad and war is ugly, and it's really up to us as Americans in this country to kind of take control back from these bureaucrats that are sending our guys and our women and everybody out there to go die in these wars. Especially when it's done over bullshit, especially when it's lies, and that's what we're finding out more and more by the day. I mean, just earlier in the week, a former deputy director of the CIA admitted, yeah, look, the intelligence that I gave to Bush and Cheney before the war was misrepresented to get us into the war, and basically said, you know what, they lied to you. At the same time, he was just saying, yeah, I was just doing my job and I gave them the intelligence. It wasn't my job to tell them, hey, why are you saying different shit on TV from what I'm telling you? But at least now he's coming clean and talking about it. But anyway, that's kind of some of the stuff that we talked about on Monday. Make sure you go back and check that out. You could either find it on the archives there on UCY.tv on the left-hand side, or you can catch it on YouTube, UCY TV on YouTube, and look up the Anti-Media Radio. You'll find us. Monday night was a great show. I am joined on the call tonight by my longtime co-host, DB Schwartz. How you doing tonight, brother?
I'm doing good, Nick. Memorial Day was a pretty good show, just listening to the guy's opinion who actually has served. And, it was a good lead into the article about, there being lies to get us into wars. And it's simply because the most profitable industry in the world, the most profitable trade is arms dealing. And you can't do that without lying to create conflict. That's just the simple nature of our world economy right now.
Exactly, and you can't do it either without people dying, you know what I mean? And so it's one thing to lie to make money, but these guys are also lying, and the result of their lying is massive amounts of people dying. We've had close to 5,000 U.S. service people directly, hurt or killed in fighting over there in Iraq. and many others that have taken mental wounds, whether through PTSD or other things like schizophrenia that were triggered by it.
And don't forget the total cost of the Middle East war is now somewhere only a slightly south of 100,000 people over the course of the last 24 years, because 91 commenced our win over Saddam. So the cost is staggering. It makes Vietnam look sort of small in comparison, and it's twice as long.
It really does, and the big difference in why this war is not as unpopular as Vietnam was is because there's not as many people directly being, dying, and there's not a draft going on yet. And we touched on this at the end of the show on Monday night, and I do want to just briefly refresh. And we're going to go into talking about ISIS and stuff next, so I just want to lead in with this. But, we heard all this stuff about, there's no troops on the ground, or there's limited troops on the ground. And yeah, we didn't have to send as many people into Iraq and Afghanistan as they did into Vietnam, mainly because our technology has advanced a lot, and now they send in the drones and stuff instead of sending in the helicopters as much, and less and less American forces are going to be dying in these wars. That doesn't mean they're not just as bad. You know what I mean? But the big thing now is that these guys are constantly saying, no troops on the ground, no troops on the ground, no troops on the ground. Well, that's going to be the future pretty soon here. There aren't going to be any troops, and it's going to be all drones, and it's going to be robots and killing machines like that. And at best, they're going to be remote controlled by these kids that are playing Call of Duty every day. And at worst, they're going to be controlled strictly by computer programs and algorithms. You know what I mean? And that adds a whole new dynamic to this idea of war, and what war is becoming, the evolution of war. And it's really something to keep an eye on, because the U.S. is at the forefront of that technology. And a lot of other countries are building that technology, including China. They're jumping ahead on the drones just as much as we are, and this is all stuff that's going to have an impact to the future of warfare and the future of propaganda, and they're going to be able to sell us wars in the future, and hey, we're going to go to war in Russia, but no, we don't got to send any troops, so a lot of people go, well, that's not too bad, but the fact of the matter is that they might not be sending troops, but the things that are going to be sent back at us are going to be just as ugly, so we got to be careful about that.
It'll be naked terrorism. That's the only response to technologically superior armies, guerrilla warfare within their borders, to make it painful enough for our civilian base that we pressure the government to get out of other countries in this imperialism. But the problem is, Nick, is that they're so hardened now, and when I say they, I mean our military and elite. They're so hardened at this point that they really don't care what happens at all. They're going to push their policies and push their agenda regardless, because I think they believe they're at the level now where their technology insulates them completely.
Yeah, man, exactly. And that's what's so scary about the future of what's going on. Now, the first story I want to bring up here kind of ties directly into what we're talking about now, is that there was a leaked report from the Pentagon about ISIS, and it was obtained by this conservative group called Judicial Watch. Now, keep in mind, Judicial Watch isn't the most reliable of sources. They have posted some questionable stuff in the past, like when they said ISIS had a base inside of Texas and stuff. That turned out not to be true. But this document that they've obtained has been verified, as far as I can tell. Various news sources have reported on it, including Ben Swan, Ron Paul, Medium.com. Anyway, I have this excerpt here from Medium.com that talks about what this document entails, and this should bother pretty much everyone. So I'm going to be reading about 3 paragraphs here from Medium.com. A declassified secret U.S. government document obtained by the conservative public interest law firm Judicial Watch shows that Western governments deliberately allied with al-Qaeda and other Islamist extremist groups to topple Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. Documents reveal that in coordination with Gulf states and Turkey, the West intentionally sponsored violent Islamist groups to destabilize Assad, and that these supporting powers desired the emergence of a Salafist principality in Syria to isolate the Syrian regime. According to the newly declassified document, the Pentagon foresaw the likely rise of the Islamic State as a direct consequence of this strategy, and warned that if it could not destabilize Iraq, Despite anticipating that Western Gulf state and Turkish support for the Syrian opposition, which included al-Qaeda in Iraq, could lead to the emergence of an Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, the document provides no indication of any decision to reverse the policy of support to the Syrian rebels. On the contrary, the emergence of an al-Qaeda-affiliated Salafist principality, as a result, is described as a strategic opportunity to isolate Assad. So, this is something that we've talked about on this show relatively nonstop, right? We continually talk about ISIS and how, the ties between ISIS and the U.S. foreign policy are pretty obvious. There's no direct evidence that we are actively supporting ISIS right now, but the evidence has been stacking up over time regarding the fact that we directly led to the results, that we see now in Iraq and Syria, which was, first things first, it's us taking out Saddam Hussein, creating a power vacuum in Iraq, and that turned, what was once a relatively, stable country, although, yeah, it was messed up. Saddam Hussein was a dictator, and he did horrible things, but it wasn't as bad as it is now. But anyway, once we toppled him, it really laid the groundwork for a thing like ISIS to even exist, because prior to 9/11, prior to our invasion of Iraq in 2003, there wasn't even any al-Qaeda, visible in Iraq. They were
right.
They weren't even there. So,
and the geopolitical implications are really staggering, because these things are pre-planned for decades. And what it really was there to do, Nick, as far as taking down Saddam, was to create sectarian strife among the three major groups, Shia, Sunni, and Kurdish. And it's going to do that. It's going to split Iraq and split that whole area into a bunch of mini warring countries, or ISIS will actually kind of go from sea to sea and make a caliphate. And then either way is fine. Chaos is fine, or just having one dictator and one supposed super country to manipulate and deal with is fine for the powers that be. They don't care either way. And it's all just leading up to the grand chessboard by Brzezinski, and there's the New American Century that continues that, and who knows what else is going to come out of Bilderberg this year. That the way to move forward for a hegemony has to go through the Middle East. I mean, it's Syria, then it's Iran, then we go after Russia, because Russia doesn't have its client states anymore. And once we have Russia and Siberia, we have an unlimited supply of fuel, and we have enough fuel to take China out with technology. So it's just the big game, and it's being played out.
Yeah, man, that's the thing, is that, a lot of we're given these excuses on why we should support these wars. And you mentioned the Project for a New American Century. That's something that was very big during the Bush era and prior to 9/11. And, these guys basically laid out a blueprint on how to conquer the Middle East, and involved taking out Libya, Syria, Iran, Iraq. These are all countries now that we're currently fiddling with. And, we already know what happened in Libya. We overthrew that government, and that place has become a failed state. But the oil contracts are still rolling out, things like that. And then in Syria, they tried to foster up this support to go topple Assad, which, was being sold to us as this horrible dictator. And don't get me wrong, he is. But the thing is that they continually lie to us about the true reasons why we're going into these countries. Now, in Libya, they told us that, Gaddafi was this guy that was just murdering and slaughtering his own people, and he needed to be stopped. And, we come to find out later that Gaddafi was actually trying to set up a Africa-wide gold-backed currency, and he was threatening the petrodollar. He didn't want to work with us with his oil. And Libya had the highest standard of living of any country in Africa prior to us toppling their government. And now they're in complete chaos, and it's just, people can't even go there anymore, and people are trying to leave. Why do you think you see all these people in the Mediterranean on these ships trying to leave Libya and try to get to Europe?
Right.
Because of what's going on over there, and we're directly responsible for that. Hillary Clinton is also partially responsible for that.
If they can somehow draw in the Italian military into confronting ISIS because of this immigration issue, and it's a humanitarian crisis, and there's human rights issues being, involved. That will draw in all of Europe. That will draw in then probably Iran and everything else. I mean, it becomes this giant vacuum.
Exactly, man, and that's exactly what we're seeing happen. It's starting to materialize, and this is all plans that go back pre 9/11. And a lot of these guys that are players in the game right now are still part of this project for a new American century. Marco Rubio, which is the Republican presidential candidate out of Florida, who I believe is going to be the establishment choice for president for 2016. He's going to be the guy, in my opinion. You guys can, anyone listening can hold me to this when the time comes. I wish I had money. I'd wager on.
What about Jeb with him as the VP because he's younger? You know what I mean?
Well, I don't think Jeb has a chance. First of all, he's got, for the same reasons Hillary Clinton has, he's just got too much baggage. He's related to the Bushes, but I think Jeb is going to play a role in the debate as far as making Rubio look like a moderate. That's what the whole thing. That's why you got Lindsey Graham. Rick Santorum now has announced that he's going to run. You got Jeb to the right of all that. And then, you got Rand Paul over to the far left in the Republican Party. And all signs point to Rubio coming off as a moderate, even though we all know he's just as crazy as Bush. He's just being run in a better package. And he's going to be kind of like Obama, where he's going to be running on this really, hope and change, and I'm going to fix stuff and all that kind of thing. And people are probably a lot of people are going to buy into it. Thankfully, we're not going to, and hopefully the people that listen to us won't. But, this is his new campaign slogan is to go into a new American century. I mean, he's even used the same exact language that this horrible, horrible plan that was hatched up to conquer the Middle East. He's using that for his campaign slogan now. I mean, so this guy is.
Imagine a world where the TPP guts every industry there is except war, Nick. That's the only thing left. And we're the best in the world at it, and we have an overwhelming advantage in resources and tech. And that's the world we're going to live in. The One World Army is going to be busy all year round.
Exactly, dude. And this is exactly why we have our show, to try to prevent this kind of stuff and to spread the information so at least people know they're aware of what's going on. We may not be able to prevent the coming war with Iran that the next Republican president is going to wage, but at least we know that we'll know what they're up to and we'll see through their bullshit. And, that's really all we can hope for. But yeah, dude, I mean, this is the future that we're seeing come into play, and as much as we can, we need to resist it. Rubio is going to probably become president, and he's going to do what he's going to do, and he's being bankrolled by the same old elite, the same old billionaires, and all the same guys. He's running on the same platform as Bush, and this guy is going to be a warmonger, dude, and that's what's going to happen. We're not going to have no Hillary Clinton. We're not going to have no Bernie Sanders, as much as I'd like to see it. We're not going to have Rand Paul, as much as I'd even like to see him run and win, because at least those, either him, Rand Paul or Bernie Sanders, at least they're kind of logical when it comes to, the amount of money we spend on this stuff that really doesn't protect us or anything like that. That's not what the establishment is interested in, man. They're interested in domination, hegemony, and making a lot of money. And so they need their candidates that are going to do that.
Which is inevitable. And nobody's going to kid anybody that if you don't think about the world logically, that it was going to come to this point at some point. But we also know by being students of history that there's massive evidence suggesting that at some point in the past, it's been at this before. A lot of people think, well, yeah, human beings have been here for 2 million years and we evolved from apes and blah, 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 and this is the furthest we've come. There's plenty of evidence that millions of years in the past we were at this point many times before. And this has played out over and over and over again as we've gotten to the point where we could destroy basically society. And we're easily at that point. We've been at that point for at least 65, 70 years. So to prevent that, but to go into a one world, basically dictatorship, I'm not sure what's worse. You know what I mean? The all-out war to prevent that, or going into that.
Yeah, and even I mean, there's various theories about past civilizations and stuff. And there was actually just today they found a quote unquote new species of human that was 2 million years old down in Ethiopia. I don't know if you saw that. But even looking at relatively recent history, Look at the Roman Empire. Look at the British Empire. Look at all the empires that have risen and fallen in the days, and then compare
I
that.
mean, did Atlantis exist? Did the Lemuria exist? Did they sink each other? Did they have a nuclear war at some point? I mean, that those kind of things are under the waves right now, but people have seen them. People testify they're there.
Yeah, man. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I mean, I don't disbelieve it, but we've seen it happen over and over just recently too. Just rise and fall of empire and decay, and the Soviet Union rise and fall. But the Soviet Union broke apart without without any kind of Armageddon, without nukes just going off and stuff. And who knows? Maybe we'll see the same thing when the American empire comes down relatively peacefully and it crumbles. I mean, who knows? There's no telling. All we do know is that we can see it starting to happen. We can see the writing on the wall. We know that empires have a finite length of time that they can exist. We know that fiat currencies like we have here with the petrodollar have a finite length of time that they can exist. So it's on us to really see that writing on the wall and make the preparations now to deal with it when it comes, and to try to make the landing as soft as possible. But yeah, this whole ISIS thing, I want to just kind of touch on the geopolitical ramifications here with ISIS. And one of the big things, and the reason why they really, I think, tried to topple Assad in the first place, is because there's this pipeline they've been trying to build that has to go through Syria, because that's the only flat land down that way. Otherwise, it'd have to go up through the Kurdish areas, and that has to go through the mountains. And of course, the Kurds usually don't sit there and stand for that kind of shit. People going through their land, they'll sit there. They'll fight. They'll fight just like the Taliban fights up in those hills. The Kurds will fight in those mountains until the death. And people don't. The Western powers don't want to deal with the Kurds. That's why we gave Saddam Hussein those chemical weapons in the first place, so that he can gas them and try to take them out. Let's not forget that happened on our watch and with our weapons and stuff like that. But the whole thing with Syria, the whole reason why they're going after Assad is to build this pipeline that's going to go through Syria. And the whole reason they're doing that is they're trying to cut Russia entirely out of Europe. And that explains exactly why Russia is so adamant about keeping Assad in power and making sure that Assad is able to defeat ISIS, which is what he's trying to do, is because Putin knows that if they lose Syria, well, then they basically they lose their entire market in Europe. And that would be devastating for their economy, and it would send them back to basically third world status. You know what I'm saying? So, that's why it's going to be a fight to the teeth down there, dude. And just as this leaked report basically shows, even though we're superficially over there fighting ISIS right now, the fact of the matter is that we see ISIS as a potential counterbalance to Assad, and
to Russian influence.
Exactly, and it was a predicted outcome, and it was an outcome that these bureaucrats that were financing and arming these rebels against Assad in Syria before ISIS became ISIS, they knew that it was probably going to happen, and they kept doing it anyway.
Right, and that would be the second client state we've knocked out in the Russian sphere, because even though we kind of set Iraq up, when we actually went in to fight them, Iraq had a bunch of Soviet arms and training, and there was even a Soviet base there, and of course that got knocked out, and a lot of people don't know that. So it's always been this grand chessboard. The Middle East is between us. It's the proxy. And if we make enough ground and knock out too many client states and cut off oil lines and everything, it starts starving their economy out. And then they become the next target, of course, Iran next, but then on to Russia. If we can it looks like we may make some kind of a truce with Iran. I don't know if you've been keeping up with this, Nick, but I think it's assumed they've already developed pretty much some nukes. And at this point, we need to negotiate.
I mean, ideally, we would negotiate, man. I'm just worried, the Project for a New American Century is going to come along, and their stooge, Marco Rubio, is going to come along, and, who knows what's going to happen when this guy takes power in 2016. It's not going to be pretty.
But then they can possibly retaliate. I mean, we can't allow that. It's not worth it no matter what.
It's not. I mean, it's not. And I've said this before, too, is that to think that there aren't any nuclear weapons in Iran, whether they develop them themselves or not, would be foolish, man. Because, like you said, they are and have been very much under the influence of the Russian of the Russians. And if you don't think the Russians have put nukes over there in Iran as a form of self-defense, I mean, you got to be pretty naive, man, because the Russians have more nuclear weapons than anybody else on Earth. So,
And they have, or I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, Nick, but and they also gave Iran the most of those S-300 SAMs, those mobile surface-to-air units, than any other country but Russia itself. And those things, I guess, are able to hit anything that's not stealth. And our entire stealth fleet, I guess, is only like 20 planes. So they're kind of like airstrike proof in a way. They'd be really, really hard to do that too. So it's going to end up being a freaking ground war with them again. So no boots on the ground, yeah, right, because we're not going to be able to get drones in there.
yeah, man. And what's next? I mean, a war with Iran is much bigger than a war with Iraq. It may be even big enough to require the draft to come back in.
A ground and naval war, dude. There would be a draft.
And that's something that most Americans don't want, as far as I know. There was an article. There was an article the other day on Washington Post, and they were basically making the case that what we need for unity again is a draft, and we need people to be caring about the military. So we got to start drafting people from every family, so that every family actually cares again. I mean, this is crazy talk, man, but this is what's being said in the mainstream right now.
Well, if they're going to send their kids, then and mandatorily, then I guess we can follow their lead. Otherwise, shut the hell up.
For real, man. Any of these politicians are more than welcome to send their kids as cannon fodder. Just don't send my brothers and sisters or my kids, please, and we'll be okay.
Yep.
So the next chess piece here that we've kind of come to see, and I'm sure everyone's heard about it today, but Israel started bombing Gaza again yesterday. And the stories that are being represented in the corporate media are relatively false. Once again, it's not that surprising, but Israel has placed the blame for a rocket that was shot into Israel yesterday on Hamas. And they're holding Hamas responsible, and the media is all saying that it was Hamas. The only problem is that there was another group that actually took responsibility, and it's a group called the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a extreme group, and they said that they're the ones that launched the rocket, and it didn't hit anybody, but at the same time, Israel turned around and said, okay, Hamas is responsible, unleash the weapons, and they started bombing once again, and it basically violated the peace treaty because they have a peace agreement between Israel and Hamas. And since Hamas wasn't the ones that really shot the missile, this is what happened. And
these splinter groups are all being probably Iranian funded, I'm sure, and they're probably just driving the IDF to the point of they're just like insane in their retribution now. Like anything that comes by is like a full airstrike followed by ground incursion as the default. Like that's going to be their de facto way now of any response.
Yeah, man, and it's very much they're very much digging their own graves here because they're losing the public opinion battle. That's for sure. And they're probably sinking a lot of resources in. And I think sooner or later, the Americans, the taxpayers, are going to finally get tired of financing all this stuff. And today it came out as well that they're asking for something like $4.6 billion a year now. They want even more aid, like that's on the books. I'm sure we're giving them black budget stuff too, but Israel wants almost $5 billion a year in aid now. And I mean, it's just crazy. It's crazy. The military already did announce that they were going to up their military aid by another $300 million a year to Israel from the U.S. And so, I mean, this is just another part of the geopolitical puzzle to keep in mind. We don't have all the answers for this, of course, but there's definitely a reason why this stuff keeps popping off over there in Israel, and there's definitely a reason why the United States and England are always propping up Israel and helped create Israel in the first place. We've talked about it before that they use Israel as a lightning rod to take all the heat in the Middle East and keep it off of us, and that's one theory. The other theory is that they're trying to keep the region destabilized and stuff like that. There's no telling exactly what's actually going on, but what we do know is that there's a lot of people dying over there needlessly. A lot of Palestinian
Well,
people are dying all the time.
Well, I was just going to say, look at the context of how it was created. It was made as supposed to be somewhere, safe and holy for the Jews. And it would have been much more just to give them like southern Germany or something like that, a big swath of that, because that's really what they deserved, was somewhere like that. But it wasn't created for that. It was the political undertones were always to control that, the source of the energy they need. They knew they would need, should there be World War III, when there was World War III. And they knew they were going to need that to supply air warfare, which they saw was the future, and it still really is.
Yeah, man. I think that it is part of the, just the war machine and the military-industrial complex, and they've always got to keep funneling arms out there as long as they keep bombing and stuff. And it's
got sweet crude, Nick. That's the key. Is the stuff they extract is the best jet fuel. So now we have the best and biggest Air Force, and that's what keeps it running.
Yeah, so the resources are there, and that's been scientifically proven to be a reason why most countries, an overwhelming amount of countries go to war in other, instigate war in other countries that they're not actually involved in. It's over resources, and we've posted a study about that on the anti-media, and this stuff is backed up relatively, well by science, and that's part of it as well. I mean, the other part of it is also to maintain a beachhead in the Middle East and make sure that you have a launching pod, a launching pad in case you ever need to do something out there in that direction, whether it's against Syria or whether it's against Jordan or whatever you need to do over there. Turkey, Israel's a perfect spot to land your boats and put all your equipment down.
So imagine this, Nick. ISIS is going to steamroll every country, right? I mean, they're not going to mess with Turkey because they wouldn't win, but everything all the way over to where Israel will be, right? And Saudi Arabia will be occupied in Yemen against the proxy Iranian troops and all the Humani youth. And what Israel's going to have clear reason to do is knock out ISIS and take all that land they just took and keep it for themselves. What do you think of that?
I mean, that's another theory too, and that's one I've floated before, not exactly with Israel, but that the whole goal with ISIS was that they were going to allow them to take over northern Syria, and then they would finally go in and put them down for real and put in a puppet government so they could run that pipeline through. I mean, you can't really discount any of these ideas because these guys that are running the show are twisted. They're sick. They lied about Iraq, and now 1 million Iraqis are dead. What won't they do? What won't these guys do? You know what I'm saying?
So they're all viable goals, and they're probably being done, and there's probably things we haven't even thought of. And if anybody can think of more reasons why these things are all coming together, please, by all means, chime in. I would love to hear a weird theory.
Yeah. By the way, anyone listening tonight, our phone lines should be accessible. The number is 718-717-8296. If anybody wants to join in, please do. We're looking forward to the calls. And if you are listening to this recording, make sure you check us out live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern for an hour. We're only an hour-long show, and sometimes we don't get through all the stuff we want to get through because me and DB and all the other people we have on here, sometimes we talk about stuff for a long time. But, there's plenty to go over. I want to jump here to the next story, and I just want to ring back to this March Against Monsanto movement because this is a big, I think, a cornerstone in the evolution of life on the planet and really taking back all of this government and all of this military and stuff. I mean, we can't do it without transforming basically the entire structure of what's going on. Because right now, looking at the state of affairs in the U.S., I mean, we're basically looking at a highly, highly centralized economic and political system that is reliant on just a handful of mechanisms, institutions, and businesses to function correctly and provide for a lot of the people that are here, and outside of the people that literally have farms or grow all of their own food, get all of their electricity off grid, and get all of their water from sources that aren't from centralized lakes and stuff. Outside of that small group of people, pretty much everybody in one way or another has to rely on these very centralized mechanisms. And that's what I think, to me, being a part of this march against Monsanto and doing the work that we've done in the past with that, to me, that's what it's always been about. It's not about GMOs as much. It's not specifically so much about Monsanto. But what it is about, to me, is revolutionizing the way we think about food and the way we get our food and the way that we grow our food, and that's, if we don't start breaking out of those institutions of centralized food, we can't break into these new ideas of alternatives to what, all these problems that we've been talking about, whether it's the foreign policy, the wars, the police beatings, and all that stuff. I mean, we have to break out of one institution at a time, and I think the food is the best place to do it, because at least with food, there's less leverage over you that the status quo can use against you. And if everybody is able to get food from local sources, from people they know, trade food, grow it on your roof, your patio, your backyard, or in your neighbor's house or whatever, those are all ways, even just something as simple as going to the farmer's market and buying food from there. Those are ways that we can start getting outside of this centralized institution of our food. And once we do that, we're going to have more freedom to start doing other things, and maybe not having to work as much and not having to worry as much, or not feeding our people bad food that makes us sick. We can start being healthier and live longer and not have to worry as much about things.
And it just takes simple cooperation. I was actually looking into doing this, Nick, about just posting like an ad on Craigslist and asking for people to just put in like $1,000 initial investment. And if you got 20 people together, 20 grand, you could come up with a pretty good acre of land pretty close to a city. And you could have 20 people that would split the work of making that food, make enough food for everyone and grow seasonally. And could 20 people get enough food out of an acre to make it worth $1,000? I think that would be like one growing season maybe that it would take to get all your investment back. And then from there on, it's what, you save $2,000, $3,000 a year in food. I mean, this is the future. We just got to cooperate on a micro level. And if enough people do it, it becomes the norm. It becomes a trend, and people want to get into it. It's just like Uber right now. Uber's starting to blow up. There's things right now that are just blowing up that they've been out for years, but now they're trendy. And they're going to start doing good for probably the world, I hope.
Exactly, man, and that's what I think this March Against Monsanto is helping accomplish, is that it's having a huge impact, especially on the bottom lines of these companies. And there was an article today that I was reading on my own. I posted it on my own personal page, but it basically was delving into the numbers of big food and the amount of money that they're making, the amount of money that they're losing. I mean, they lost $4 billion in market share last year alone. We're talking about the big food companies, General Mills, these kind of people, Kraft, and they lost $4 billion in market share, man. Meanwhile, the organic foods sector has grown 11% in 2014. So we're talking about these ideas are actually coming to fruition now. And they're starting to see a huge change in the way these guys are trying to do business. And I mean, McDonald's, I was just reading right now before the show that McDonald's is going to change the way they're cooking their hamburgers. Just this week, Taco Bell and Pizza Hut announced that they were removing all the artificial ingredients from their food. There's a huge impact going on right now, and it's just going to continue to get bigger and bigger, and sooner or later we're going to see that the entire food supply is now changed. And are we going to be able to get completely off of going to Vons and buying frozen stuff that's or canned food and stuff? No, we're never going to be able to get completely off of that. But the whole point is to start slowly working away from it. and then it's not going to be like some drastic lifestyle change, and it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. It's by the time the next generation is growing up, it's going to be, a lot of things are going to be different, and all we can do right now is try to move things in the right direction. And if history tells us anything, I don't have the answer. Do I know what kind of government is the best government? No. I mean, we've talked about all types of different governments. You and me, DB, have varying opinions on governments and this kind of thing. I do know that decentralization, I think, is the main key to keep in mind here, whether we're talking about government, economics, control, resources and things like that, technology, I mean, everything. Decentralizing it is probably the best, way of going about doing things, right?
And it's not for everyone, and that's the thing, is there's a lot of people that are going to want to stay completely plugged into the current paradigm, and will even go along with more control over themselves under the perceived security and for the convenience of it. And there's going to be a lot of people that want to go back to kind of taking more of their lives into their own hands and growing their own food and doing things like that, making their own energy. And automation technology and capabilities will make that a reality. There really will be kind of two different kinds of societies. Now, they can intersect and interplay and benefit each other, but the goal is to not make it so that everyone is just blanket oppressed against their will and by violence.
Exactly, man, and that's the way I see it. Is one step in the direction of decentralization is one step away from fascism. It's one step away from control, and so that's the direction we should be taking with our food, and that's what is being relatively apparent right now. I remember when we first started this with this whole march against Monsanto stuff. It was like 3 years ago, and here in San Diego, I mean, DB, you could attest to this, man. How many farmers markets were there 5 years ago?
Oh, probably 3 maybe. And what are there now? Like a dozen?
Yeah, man. I was looking the other day, and there's now like between 30 and 40 farmers markets in San Diego County.
Oh yeah, it's similar up here too. And then we have that growing season right now, so it's coming back. And a lot of people want to do community farming because organic is expensive. I would spend $1,000 to get unlimited organic all year. I mean, that's something that makes financial sense.
Yeah, exactly, man. And people are also reconnecting with the dirt too, man. That's important. We come from it. Our ancestors grew up farming, and there's been studies that show that, one, gardening and that kind of thing it helps relieve anxiety. Two, it's really healthy for the kids. It helps them prevent them from getting allergies and asthma and that kind of thing. And three, it's just good to know where your food's coming from, so you actually know what's in it. You're not worried that it's either being farmed with horrible herbicides like Roundup, or if it's being farmed by slave labor down in Mexico.
Exactly.
You got to know where this stuff is coming from and what it's being used to grow it.
And raising your own chickens for eggs and for their meat is the only thing remotely humane you can do when you're eating meat, just like hunting. And the factory farming would be unnecessary, and people would eat less meat, and it would be better and higher quality. It would just change the whole dynamic of our entire food economy.
Yeah, man, and that's another thing too. Out here in California, another thing I want to talk about is we got this huge drought and stuff, and one technology that is really nice as far as when it comes to talking about this food and decentralizing our food supply is aquaponics. And I was practicing aquaponics for a while until my mom had to move out of her house, and we no longer had a yard to put it in. I did give it to my friend, and he's going to use it, but aquaponics is a really cool system. It saves like 90% of the water. Once you have it up and running, man, it like runs like a perfect ecosystem, and it's very low maintenance, and you grow fish at the same time, and you grow awesome organic food. The only thing you have to put into the system is food for the fish and water once you get evaporation and the water that's absorbed by the plants. You just have to add a little bit of water in there once a week or whatever. But it's a really efficient way of growing food, and it also will help defeat this drought if you're down in the Southwest. It's a great practice. I mean, there's a lot of business opportunities too. I've got a few friends around here that are in the business of setting up aquaponics, teaching people how to use them and that kind of thing. And I mean, there's opportunity to use it and do it. And here in California, this drought's not really going away, and even when it does, we get very very little water anyway. And if we want to talk about decentralizing, we got to start talking about using a lot less water, because right now we're all dependent on shipping this water in from the Colorado River and from Northern California. So we're going to decentralize. You got to do it with the water too. For best way to do that, use less of it. The less water you use, the less you need, the less leverage.
And with abundant sunshine out there, you can, as long as there's a high enough dew point, like especially in the morning, you can leach water out of the air with those condensers, and they'll just collect in the 5-gallon jugs. You can go outside and get drinking water out of those. So there's lots of novel ideas. I mean, right now you're allowed to claim as much rainwater as you want, which is crazy, the opposite of Oregon. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, man, there's so many ways of doing it, but I think we're seeing good progress, and it just needs to go further. And we can't. I think one thing that does scare me is that people are just gonna try to shift over into this. Okay, we're just gonna eat organic food now instead. Which, don't get me wrong, eating organic is better than eating regular, pesticide treated crops, because it's better for the environment, it's better for you. But that's not enough, because most people, I mean, the average working class people can't really afford to eat all organic. As you were saying, DB, it's extremely expensive. So it's all the more important to literally get in the business, or get in the act or the practice or the habit of growing it, or at least helping growing it, or know the person that's growing it, because that continues to push us away from the corporate controlled food supply system.
And think of the practical uses of a micro farm and the relationships with the people that co-invest you'd have too, where when things do truly get tough, if they ever got to depression level, imagine the position you're in with a bunch of people who put work into that farm. You guys know how to grow food, and you're there united, and you'll protect what you got. I mean, it gives you this level and blanket of security. It really needs to happen before things really de-escalate.
Yep, exactly, man. I couldn't agree with you anymore. So that being said, Sri Lanka has now banned the use of Roundup and glyphosate specifically, but obviously that's Roundup's included in that. But this again is some relatively positive news in a way. I mean, of course, banning something doesn't fix the problem, but it goes to show that these guys out there in Sri Lanka, they have 2 studies done by a professor out there at one of the colleges that links this chronic, it's like a chronic kidney disease basically, and they call it CKDU. 15% of the working age population in northern Sri Lanka suffer from this thing. And coincidentally, it's also a place where they use a lot of glyphosate in the agriculture. It's an agricultural zone. And so these studies have linked the glyphosate with this disease, because what it does, it's not specifically the glyphosate that's hurting these people. It's what glyphosate does when it reacts with heavy metals in the water, and it uptakes it into the kidney, and that's what's really causing these people. 400,000 of them suffer from it, and estimated 20,000 people already dead from it. So they've banned it now. Again, they banned it back last year in March. Now they've banned it again, and it was overturned last time, but this time it looks like it's going to be held in place, following the World Health Organization's study that came out last month regarding how glyphosate is most likely causing cancer in humans. So these people are starting to turn their backs on these horrible practices, and specifically Monsanto. And this is also following El Salvador also banned it, and so this is the second country. They banned it back in 2013, but for the same reason, the kidney disease.
And Monsanto's is threatening to almost single-handedly derail the TPP part of the food part of the TPP, because there's lots of countries, Peru included, that simply want to ban on all of this stuff because they've seen the skyrocketing problems with our population and health, and they simply don't have the infrastructure and the pharmaceutical industrial complex in their own countries to make money off that. It would instead be this huge weakening of their country and really make an epidemic there.
Yeah, exactly, man. And so there's a bunch of countries that are suffering from this stuff, and a lot of them are starting to take action. We know Colombia is not going to spray it on their coca fields anymore, even the illegal ones. They were using glyphosate to spray over top of the illegal coca grows, which most people know is the plant they use to make cocaine, and they were using it to destroy those crops. But after a bunch of farmers were complaining that their crops were becoming collateral damage and getting hit or getting affected by this stuff. And then following the World Health Organization report about it, they decided to stop spraying it, even on the illegal stuff. I mean, so that just tells, kind of goes to show you other countries are taking this stuff seriously, man. But this stuff is still being put in a lot of our food when it comes to the corn and the soybeans and that kind of stuff. And the corn is in almost everything. And our kids are still eating this stuff. Meanwhile, other countries are saying, entire countries are saying, okay, we're not going to allow our people to be exposed to this stuff. So, I mean, that just kind of says something there, and we should take it seriously as much. A lot. Monsanto has been talked about so much that I think people are kind of like, whatever. We've heard it all and stuff. But man, it's affecting people on a regular basis, every day, everywhere, and it's the most poor communities, the farming communities, the indigenous populations that are getting affected by this stuff, and it's just messed up.
And there's a backlash to it, Nick. Up here in the Midwest area, there was a big avian flu. It went for 3 or 4 cycles, and it pretty much wiped out most of the chicken and turkey, flocks for the year. I mean, it's really going to stifle a lot of supply. And what's the response is a big company like Hormel up here bought Applegate Organics. Why? Because their flocks didn't get hit with that. They're not being fed GMO foods. They're not being overexposed to all these antibiotics and having these mutated whatever's going on with them happen. So they're protecting themselves.
When you get hit with the antibiotics all the time, your immune system goes down too. And they're overcrowding all the chickens and stuff in these huge factory farms. So then you got these illnesses. They just go right through them, through the whole thing, and take out.
And the response is to buy these independent places because the offer's too good to pass up. $775 million. And now another organic natural producers under a factory farming business method. It's not going to matter if they meet some lessened and weakened USDA organic criteria. It's not going to be the same each and every year. And pretty soon with TPP signed, we're not even going to know if it's organic Chinese, organic Vietnamese, organic Peruvian. We won't know where it's from.
Yeah, man, and the TPP is something that we don't want to forget about here. The TPP is still going through the Senate. It's pretty much passed, and it's going to be on Obama's desk relatively soon. I don't know if it's going to be in a month or a couple weeks, but it's going to be here really soon. And that's
get your money in a credit union at the
very
minimum.
The TPP, for anyone still not that still doesn't know about it, it's where the almost all actions of corporations internationally will be held accountable, not to any body, not to any consumer union, not to any government, not to anything, except for a corporate tribunal, which will be made up of basically lobbyists and advocates from all of these companies. So basically, it's a very, very pro-corporate type of trade bill. I can definitely see it, finding its way into resource disputes where companies may want to come in. Let's say Nestle wants to come in and lay claim to buy a water table from somebody and just suck it dry. I mean, these are the kind of things that can take place under the TPP, and I mean, it's already happening now as it is, but it's just going to get worse and worse.
And here's what it does to the average person: if you're at a job that can be done by somebody somewhere, anywhere for cheaper, it's going to be outsourced probably within a year or two once they get rid of all these trade unions, and they will bust them. And that's going to, make a big problem with our country, and it's going to devalue the dollar. But to counterbalance that, at least in their crazy ideological minds, they're going to probably be able to provide more money for the top producers in the country and think that the voting base will protect them. But I mean, you're talking about already this critical mass has been reached as far as enough people now just don't have any. As soon as there's nothing left to lose, Nick, the 1% and the 10% underneath them as cronies are just, there's not going to be enough of them. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, man, and you're right. We are reaching a critical mass already now. Like, I mean, it's happening sooner than I thought. But there was just a case that came out over the weekend, or no, just a couple days ago, where a guy was getting arrested by these cops for open container, and there was like a group of people nearby, and they just came and intervened and like, surrounded the cops, took the guy out of their custody, and let the guy go, and then they all bounced out, and then the guy was eventually arrested, like, later on. But this is the second time that this has happened in recent months. And then all the protests going on and the amount of civil unrest going on everywhere in opposition to, the police state, racism, and just the overall control structure that's holding basically everybody down. It really is kind of scary that they're trying to push this TPP thing through now, because the TPP, it's been compared to NAFTA, and many people can recall what went on with NAFTA, and it had some really crazy economic impacts and caused a lot of people to lose their jobs and caused a few corporate interests, of course, to get really rich. And it opened up a lot of, the horrible labor practices that are being done right now in Mexico against the farm workers and stuff like that. I mean, NAFTA definitely plays into all that stuff. And these are the same concerns that people have with the TPP. Now, there was just news out of Malaysia and Thailand, out in that area. There was like these mass graves that were discovered. And now they're, talking about how these graves look like they're probably from human traffic, sex slaves, basically. And these are countries that we're entering into a TPP agreement with, a trade pact. And, these are companies that have egregious histories when it comes to the treatment of people and human rights and that kind of thing. I mean, it's just like how we turned a blind eye to Saudi Arabia for so long. This is what we're getting ready to do economically with the TPP, and solidify these corporate contracts that are maybe questionable for who exactly we're working with over there. It's this is a very questionable company, to say the least.
It creates an economic bloc that excludes China too, and it takes away a large portion of the South China Sea officially given to Vietnam and the Philippines, and I believe even Taiwan, which they recognize and would probably give them enough of a reason to go at least into a limited exchange with China. So these are all things that are, an undercurrent too. A lot of people think it's the gutting of our economy and making us truly a one world economy, and that's in a part true, but it's also just putting China in this box, much like Russia has on its Western front.
Of course, they never want to do. You always want to look at what they're doing and think that it's probably got geopolitics involved in it if they're doing anything big on the international scene. Whether we're talking about foreign policy in Libya, Syria, Iraq, and that, or we're talking about just the things that are going on just over the border. They always seem to be on this geopolitical path where it's always about this kind of chess game, and it's never actually about what they say it is on at face value, and like all these politicians are saying that, this thing is going to help the economy, TPP, it's going to boost jobs, this, that, and the other. The main reason the Democrats were holding out on voting for the TPP is because they were trying to get more money for a job training program for all the people that lose their jobs from the TPP. Not even joking you. So like they're getting ready to pass this bill that they're at face value claiming is going to create jobs, while at the same time embedding spending into that bill that's going to go retrain people that are losing their jobs because of it. You know what I mean? So like we're talking about a completely hypocritical action that's going on here, and like almost all of Congress is pretty much guilty, man. It seems to be like it's getting ready to go to Obama's desk, and that's the last holdout. Obama has been showing that he wants this thing to pass. He's not going to veto that. He's going to sign it. As soon as it gets to him, he's going to sign it. So, I mean, something to watch at the very least. The other thing to watch, the Patriot Act, there's going to be a vote on it on Saturday possibly. Otherwise, the Patriot Act, parts of it are going to expire on the 31st. Keep an eye on that. It's going to be on Sunday. Thanks for tuning in. Catch the show tomorrow, 5 days a week. Peace.
I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo.